Okay, in terms of the stuff, the deadlines remain unchanged. So exam 1 covering part 1, quiz and assignments part 2 covering part 2. Deadline March 1st, Friday, 11 to 9 p.m. Exam 2, quiz and assignments part 3, April 5th, also end of day. Then exam 3, exam 4, quiz and assignments part 4, April 26th, end of day. And then exam 5, the final covering all the things. Deadlines on Wednesday of finals week at 5 p.m. And again, you only need exam 5 if it can help you. And I'll mention this again at the end. That once you've done 4 exams, all the quiz and assignments was to do, and all the other stuff has been put into play, then you can go and use the grade estimator to see if the final could help you or not. And again, if you don't take it, it's a 0, but it's already calculated in your grade. So as you're doing stuff, either you haven't done is treated as a 0, so you know exactly what the grade would be if you stop. So once you get finished all that stuff, you'll be able to see if the final can help you or not. And again, if you didn't take it, it can't hurt your grade, because not doing stuff never lowers your grade. Doing stuff either leaves it the same or improves it. Upcoming meetings this week and next. Today, 2 to 3. Tomorrow, 12 to 2. Next Tuesday, 2 to 5. And next Wednesday, 11 to 5. I've been assigned to 3 more committees. Not sure they're meeting, but once I know when they're meeting, I'll let you know as well. Eventually, I'll just run out of time. I just hit like 90 hours or 1,000 hours or something. Before heading further into chapter 5, anything about?
We can take the exam on our own laptop, so we don't have to take it on like the
Right. You can use your own laptop. The quizzes and assignments apparently don't seem to work on the mobile app, or even though it's nothing weird about them, just the mobile app. Hey, just use your own equipment at your own convenience. Okay, anything else? Okay, so last time we were looking at the beginning of chapter 5, looking at rhetoric. And understanding rhetoric has always been useful ever since humans developed the ability to speak and such. But even now, it's even more important because we have massive social media, etc. And so we're engaged in constant flooding of rhetoric and fallacies and disinformation. And so the first and second part are in a way both defensive. How do you deal with all the issues of credibility and rhetoric and bad reasoning? But also can be used offensively. How would you use, exploit credibility? How would you use rhetoric and fallacies to sway the unwary? So last time we looked at euphemisms and dissimilisms, and we saw with a euphemism, they try to take the negative or neutral, make it seem good. So you have something bad, and you want to make it seem not bad, rather than like actually making it good, that is, take out the negative term, put in the positive term. So if we were backing a group of armed fighters, we wouldn't call them terrorists, we'd call them freedom fighters or rebels. If, however, they were doing things we didn't want them to do, we would use a dissimilism. It's where you take something neutral or positive and you pull out the neutral or positive term, throw it away, and put in something negative. So we refer to people with guns we don't like as terrorists, because that's a dissimilism. That would be bad. So these are basically polarity terms, making the neutral or bad seem good, euphemism, making the neutral or good seem bad, dissimilism. The way to defend against them is to neutralize them. Take the positive term, put in the neutral term. Or in the case of dissimilism, take the negative term, put in a neutral term. And as mentioned before, there are some terms that by their nature are just kind of, even though they're describing the thing accurately, they may be sort of like inherently positive or negative. So for example, if you're describing a genocide, that is the accurate term, and for human beings who are decent, genocide is a negative thing. So there may be neutral terms that are bad, things like murder, genocide, extermination, but they could be, fully neutral terms in the sense that that's what it really is. Our next rhetorical device in our toolkit or our app collection is the Weasler. Now, Weasels, of course, are just trying to get by in the world like everyone else, but they have kind of a bad rap. So if someone's described as being like a weasel, what does that mean? Is it good to be called a weasel? No, if someone said, hey, you're a big weasel, you wouldn't say, why, thank you. You'd probably say, that's terrible. Yeah, because weasels are supposed to be what? What are the stereotypes of a weasel? Sneaky. Yeah, sneaky and cunning and deceitful. And they're all, sly and quick. So the weaselers kind of use that term. They're also, committing a stereotype against the poor weasels. Now, the weaseler at first will seem kind of weird, because the strict definition is this. It's when you take a claim and you protect it by weakening it, which seems like a weird thing, because normally if you're trying to protect something, you wouldn't, weaken it. So, for example, we seem to always be getting hurricanes here in Tallahassee now, and if the mayor said, we're going to protect our infrastructure by weakening it, you would think, wow, that's crazy. If you picture people going out and weakening the trees and weakening the wires, that would seem to be insane. Or if you had you owned a company and your IT person came and said, we're going to protect our company by weakening our firewalls and defenses. You'd probably say, that's crazy. We need, you're fired, we need a new IT person. So how can it work to protect something by weakening it? Well, it's not like a Zen riddle, the sound of one hand clapping, or to go forward you must go back type of deal. In this case it actually works, because here's the idea. When you have a claim, the strength of a claim is not a measure of how true it is or how weak it is. It's essentially how precise, how powerful that claim is. And in that case, claims that are very strong doesn't mean that they're true. It just means they're making a very, say, exact, a very powerful, more extreme claim. And because of that, very strong claims need very strong support. So the more precise the claim is, the more support it would need. The more bold and extreme the claim is, the more support it needs. So the stronger a claim is, in this sense, the more support it needs in order to prove it. So for example, if I say that President Trump will win the next election by exactly 2 electoral votes, in that case, that's a pretty strong claim, because I'm claiming he'll win, I'm claiming he'll win by exactly 2 votes, and so I would require a lot of proof for anyone to believe that. Now, because of this, the weaker you make a claim, sort of weirdly, the more protected it is, because you're making it less precise, less extreme, less bold, and so it's easier and easier to defend. So a weaker claim is more likely to be true because it's less precise, less bold, less extreme, and requires less support. So you can protect the claim by weakening it. So for example, if I say President Trump might win next time, it's a pretty weak claim. In fact, it's pretty easy to defend because unless he's impeached, then it's possible. It's easy to prove because he's probably going to run, and there's a non-zero chance he will win. So it'd be a very weak claim because I'm not claiming that much. So how does a weaseling fit into this? Well, with weaseling, what one does is this: you take a claim and you water it down, you make it less precise, less extreme, less exact, you weaken it. And that way, weirdly in a way, you defend it. You make it harder to attack, harder to criticize. Give some more examples. Politicians, not surprisingly, and other advertisers do a lot of weaseling. So suppose I was running for president in 2020, and I was running on, say, reducing the cost of health care. Now, suppose I were to say then reduce your cost of health care by exactly 25%, and I'll do this over the course of 2 years. for everybody in the United States, and I'll reduce prescription prices 50% over 2 years. Is that a pretty bold claim? Yeah, and what would show me to be wrong? 2 years go by, and what happens? Yeah, that doesn't happen. So if I get, say, you know, close to it, I get like, you know, I reduce pharmaceutical costs 24%, or I do it over the course of 3 years, then I was wrong. My critics would say he was wrong. He was not. Now, so as a politician, when I make such an exact claim, I'm going to lower pharmaceutical costs by 25% in exactly 2 years. No, what would I probably say? I'm going to lower pharmaceutical costs. Because what does that commit me to? Yeah, lower. If they're all lower. And if I give no timeline, how long do I have? I have forever. Forever and ever. And so as long as, I mean, technically speaking, I could say even after I've left office, you know, and I'm 105, I could say this could still be true. It could still go down someday. So the weaker the claim, the harder it is to attack. So the advantage is, use the example of a politician, if you're running for office and you make like a very precise claim, you know, the journalists, if they're doing their job, or the critics will go after that. They'll say, well, how are you going to do that exact thing? But if you weaken it down to, instead of, I'm going to lower pharmaceutical costs by 25% to over 2 years, to I'm lowering pharmaceutical costs, that's pretty weak. And so you're not going to get hit as hard, because all it takes to make that true is just lowering the cost a little bit. Advertising also works in a very similar way. Advertising usually doesn't make like exact, precise claims. They'll say things like up to. And up to means what? Like if I say, if you use my new fuel additive, your car will get up to 20% more mileage. How much am I promising you? Nothing, really. Well, actually, weirdly, I promise you it'll be no more than 20%. So if you get worse mileage, I've still told the truth, because I said it's not going to be any more than 20%. Because it gives me, my claim is pretty weak. Weirdly, the only thing that disproves my claim is if it actually gives you more than 20%. That's only I'd be lying. Other ways to weasels is to use, well, weasel words are things like up to, also the word some, or you know, sort of generic plurals like doctors, say. For example, suppose I start deciding in the pharmaceutical business, which is very profitable, and I make a new painkiller, and I get 2 doctors to say, yeah, I give this to my patients because I paid them. Now, when I'm doing my advertising, am I going to say, yeah, these 2 doctors that I paid, they'll recommend it? Would that be something I would say in my advertising? No, what will I say? Because 2 doctors doesn't sound like a lot. Instead, I would just say doctors. Because if I say doctors recommend, it's true, because I have 2, but it sounds, people think like it's a lot of doctors. And so doctors is kind of weaseling, because instead of saying like exactly the percentage of doctors, I'm just saying, you know, doctors. Or again, words like some. If I say some people still don't believe climate change is, or some researchers don't believe climate change is real, is that true? Yeah, because some means at least 1. And you could find somebody researching something, somewhere, because I didn't say climate change researchers, that believes that. So that claim would be true. And if someone calls me on it, you know, it's pretty weak. I can say, yeah, there's a researcher that's doing this. So weaseling is pretty useful when you expect to be attacked, like you get running for office, selling stuff, or in everyday life when you want to not commit to things. So recap on weaseling. What is it? It's taking a claim and weakening it so that it kind of oddly makes it more defended, because it's harder to disprove it. The weaker a claim is, the more vague, the less it commits to, the easier it is to defend, because you can just say, yeah, I met that really weak condition. The way to use it on the side of evil, as we saw, is when you want to say things and have people interpret it, as a stronger claim, but not want to be, held accountable, thing to do is make a weak claim, especially one that kind of implies a stronger claim. Like, instead of saying, two doctors said they'll use my pain medicine, say doctors have said they'll recommend my pain medication. And that way you can say something that seems strong, but is actually weak, and if you get called on it, you can fall back to that weaker position. So it's a very good defensive tactic. Again, if you look at advertising, politicians, they'll use this quite a bit when they're trying to say something without really committing to anything. And again, you can also use this in everyday life. If you want to pretend to commit without actually committing, like I'll be there sometime. And of course, sometime means pretty much all the time. You have forever to do it. If someone says, when are you going to do the laundry? I'll take care of it sometime. And in that case, you've committed to doing it sometime before the end of time, which probably gives you an infinite amount of time to do it. So, plenty of time. So how do you defend against it? Well, the thing to do is look for the weaseling. If you can't engage with a person, then what you do is you would say, if it's important, what are they actually committing to? So if a politician is saying, I am committed to reducing the cost of college tuition, well, a fair question to be is, what does that mean? How much are they going to reduce it? How strong is their commitment? What's their plan? Because they can be committed to it, but that commits them really to nothing. They haven't said they're going to do anything. Now, if you can engage with them, the thing to do, of course, is ask them questions. You use the old Socratic method and ask them, well, you're committed to lower the cost of tuition. How much? When is this going to be done? I'm graduating soon. Will this help me? And those would all be ways of narrowing them down. Now, of course, if you're weaseling, you'd want to keep from being narrowed down because you want to keep it weaseled. Last thing, qualifying. Now, at this point, it may be tempting to think, aha, anytime someone qualifies, they're weaseling. So if someone says, I'll get it done soon, you might say, aha, they're trying to weasel me. Or if someone's running for office and they make, some claim, you might say, aha, they're weaseling. But what we have to do is distinguish between qualifying and weaseling. Now the challenge is this. Qualifying and weaseling can sound exactly the same words. So what is the difference and how can you tell? Well, the difference, unfortunately, is a matter of intent. To use an analogy, it's like the difference between lying and being wrong. If someone's lying, they're saying something they believe is not true, and they're doing it maliciously, and they want you to believe it. If someone's just wrong, they believe what they're saying, they want you to believe it, but they're just in error. And so even though they may be saying the exact same thing, someone was lying and someone was wrong, may say the exact same words, but what the difference is in their motivation and their belief. Same with weasel. You could have two people saying the exact same words, one could be weaseling, one could be qualifying. Because the difference lies in the intent. Qualifying is when you're being honest and you don't know. You don't know all the exact details, you don't know all the precise points of the matter, and so you're qualifying because you honestly don't know. So the person is being truthful, and their objective is to give you the best information they've got, but it's not, really strong information. In the case of weaseling, the person has a different intent. Their objective is this, to protect a claim by intentionally weakening. And again, it can sound exactly the same way. For example, if I was working on, helping someone with a computer problem, they're like, yeah, I did this, download all these, viruses from questionable sites, my computer's a mess, can you get it working for me? And if I say to them, yeah, I might be able to get it fixed in, a couple hours, maybe a couple of days, in that case, if my intent is not to, weasel, I'm qualifying. I don't know exactly how long it's going to take to get all that crap off their hard drive. And so if you honestly don't know how long something's going to take, you're qualifying rather than weaseling. Although it may sound exactly the same. So it can be hard to distinguish the two, because you kind of have to know the person's intent. So how do you tell when you can't read people's minds? Which we can't do. Well, one thing to look for is the context. If it's a case where the person seems to be being honest, and you'd say, yeah, they probably don't know, then probably qualify. If you'd say, would a person legitimately know like all these details, or is it reasonable to think they would have to qualify? If the answer is yes, probably qualify. If it's a scenario where they probably should know the details, like in the case of a politician and their tax plan, but they're not giving them, they're probably weaseling. Okay, so that's our good friend, the weaseler. You use it when you want to protect the claim by weakening it, and the defense is essentially pushing for details. Or if no details are provided, then sort of suspending judgment on their claim. Before moving from the weasels, anything about weaseling that needs more weaseling? Downplayers. Downplayers are super useful if you, well, they're sort of an essential tool if you ever plan on being like a spin doctor for a politician or a celebrity or a company. Because what they do essentially is this. Basically, there's two functions. One is to take something that is bad and basically make it seem less bad. And you can downplay, as you'd imagine, with a euphemism, making something bad seem less bad. Like, they didn't kill them, they just neutralized them. Or that, in referring to like criminal activity by a celebrity or politician, not as criminal activity, but as a indiscretion, or a youthful indiscretion. Now the other type is, so going along this vein, also if you take something that's, say, good, and you want to push it down, make it seem less good, the same sort of thing, to make a good accomplishment or good achievement seem less good. So kind of the first mode is taking the good or bad and making it seem less so. The second use of a downplayer is trying to just simply dismiss something, to dismiss somebody's importance or credibility or their claims. For example, a person might say, yeah, sure, people talk a lot about climate change, but that's just a bunch of liberals, whining about things and they're so-called experts. And they're so-called to be a downplayer, saying, don't listen to them. So what is the formal definition of the downplayer? Well, formal definition is this. A downplayer is when you use words or phrases that make something, again, option one, seem less important, less serious, less good or bad than it really is. Literally, downplaying it. The other, essentially, is dismissing someone's credibility, the statements, their legitimacy, by rejecting them. Essentially saying, don't consider them worth listening to. So, examples. Now, in terms of the first one, this is often used, commonly used professionally, is damage control for celebrities, politicians, corporations. And there's good money to be made in that, because celebrities, politicians, and corporations get into a fair amount of trouble, and they often handle things badly on their own. And any smart politician has a spin team, so when they do something stupid or something comes out of their past, they have people who can come in and tell them what to say. And it makes a huge difference. For example, well, we can look at recently at what's happening to the governor of Virginia. Has this thing exposed from his past, which was bad, and then he goes and handles it and just simply makes it even worse. He did not spin it well. Now again, spinning is sort of ethically neutral, it can be good or bad, but the idea is essentially when a politician runs into a crisis, from a practical standpoint, they don't want to make it worse, they want to make it less bad. So what one would do to downplay is to refer to something not as like a racist incident, but as a youthful misjudgment or youthful, indiscretion. And that's how often people sell it. Like, for example, think of Brett Kavanaugh, when he was going to the Supreme Court. Many of his defenders said, well, if he did it, he was just, he's just a kid and he was, drinking, so it's a youthful, misjudgment, as opposed to sexual assault. And so spinning it is to make something bad, like assault, or being racist, and make it seem less serious. And if someone's good at doing that, they can minimize the damage. Which is why, as you might imagine, there is people who do this professionally, spinning for politicians, celebrities, etc. Also, one can take things that are good and try to push them down. So, for example, a politician, like when we've got the elections coming up, and so what the Democrats will try to do to Trump is take anything he's done good and try to downplay it. They might say, yeah, he got us talking with North Korea, but he's doing all this other terrible stuff. And the idea being is like, yeah, he did this thing, but it's not really as good as you think because of this other bad stuff. And so we can take things that are good and try to push them down. Likewise, the Republicans do the same to the Democrats, saying, yeah, they did this good thing, but, and they'll try to push it down that way. So kind of method one is damage control, making the bad stuff done by your client or your side or you seem less bad, or making the good stuff done by your opponents or your client's opponents seem less good. And it's very effective because you want to control perception. And again, good examples of how politicians or companies handle damage control. Some are really good. They're very smooth at it. Things occur, they get it under control, and it doesn't become a scandal at all. Then there are others who just they walk in and they're like, look, a fire, I'm gonna throw more gasoline on it and see what happens. Oh wow, the gasoline just made it burn more. I know what I'll do, more gasoline. And we know how those end up. Now the other type is dismissing the credibility or importance or significance of someone. So this is often done in politically charged matters. So if a conservative think tank says that immigration is causing this danger to the United States, a liberal might say, yeah, the Cato Institute says it has this particular harmful effect, but of course, they're just another conservative talking tank, basically trying to dismiss them. And of course, on the right they might say, yeah, this liberal think tank says immigration is good, but they're just so-called experts, saying that's not important. As you might imagine, this also can incorporate biases, racism, sexism. We see, for example, when if a woman's testifying against someone, they're often dismissed. The idea being that, oh, they're just in it for the money, they're just trying to get famous. And the idea is, oh, you shouldn't listen to them, they're just, looking for money, looking to get famous, out for revenge. And that's downplaying the credibility of their claims. That's a common tactic. So how do you defend against the downplayers? Well, the general ones essentially are, in the case of pushing down the good or pushing down the bad, is to look at the facts. What is the reality of the situation? How bad or how good is it really? When someone's dismissing someone else's credibility, we can go back to what we saw in the previous section. Is this relevant to their credibility? And of course, the one to always use is, are their claims actually true? Now, another tool of downplaying is with conjunctions. One thing you can do is downplay by using these conjunctions. Now, conjunction is a fancy term, as we'll see in the future, for and. And as we'll see in the future, conjunctions are claims in which you say X and Y. And of course, English gives us a variety of ways to say that. We can have X, but Y, and various other things. And we'll see when we get to the final part, the true functional logic for this. Now, typically what you would do when you downplay with conjunctions, you typically use the word but. and you'd have something bad or good, and then you'd have this kind of template. So if you want to take something bad and kind of downplay it, you'd say, you'd acknowledge like, this, here's the bad, but good. For example, a person might say, well, let's take a look at carnage on the roads. Every year, roughly 40,000 people are killed in automobile, vehicle-related episodes, often involving alcohol. That's a lot of dead people. That's like about 7 times the population of my hometown. It's like my town being wiped out 7 times. I'm from a tiny place. So what we might say, oh yes, 40,000 people dying every year is bad, but the private automobile is critical to our economy, and of course we have this independence and freedom. And so the idea basically is, yeah, it's bad that many people die, but it's not that bad, because think of how much fun it is to drive. Now, of course, you can do it the opposite way. You could say, take something good, and then say, but bad, and then reverse that, and say, yes, this is a good thing, but here's a bad thing to make it seem less good. For example, a person might say, well, let's take a political issue today. Many of the Democrats are going to run on the platform of Medicare for all, which is what? Have you heard the pitch? If they get elected and they do Medicare for all, what do we all get? Medicare. Yeah, Medicare, you may, actually, none of us are old enough to get Medicare yet, hopefully, soon. But it's basically the government, picks up the tab for your medical bills. And so the idea, the proposal essentially is we all get enrolled in Medicare. If you looked at your, if you do your taxes, you'll see up in the corner the Social Security and Medicare. So you're already paying for it. And the idea is that we'd all have that, no more private insurance. So someone might say, yes, it's good that people are insured, but think of all the waste and the fraud. Because it is true that last year there was like billions of dollars in Medicare fraud, especially in Florida. We're like the fraud capital of the world. Also the opioid capital. We're number one in opioid and Medicare fraud. Maybe we're not number one in opioids now. I think we worked that out a little bit. Now, at this point, one would be thinking, but isn't it reasonable to say, if you get something bad, but there are, say, good things, or if something's good but there are bad things, shouldn't you consider that? And the answer is, of course, yes. But the rhetoric is not saying, let us weigh the pluses and minuses and rationally consider them. What it's doing is not that. It's kind of masquerading of that. What it's doing is essentially saying, okay, yeah, you think this is bad, but here's something good, so think it's not bad. It's not asking you to do like a rational calculation. What are the pluses and minuses? It's basically saying, oh, you think this bad, here's something good. To use an analogy, it'd be kind of like you get some food, and you're like, the food's too burnt, and the person like puts a little salt on it. It's like, oh, that's better. It hasn't done anything really logically, it's just made it taste better. Likewise, the reverse is, something is good, and the person isn't saying, here are reasons against it, they're just saying it's bad. To use an example, so as you get a dog, and your dog is like eating your couch, and you try that thing where you get like the spray on, bad, tasting stuff to keep the dog away from it, you're not reasoning with your dog, you're just trying to make it taste bad, so the dog doesn't eat that. And those things often don't seem to work, because the dog just always seems to like that stuff. Because sometimes they're like apple flavored. This is pretty delicious. Now, context can often have a factor in downplay, whether you're pushing something down, trying to dismiss it, or if it's not downplaying. For example, if someone says, oh, Sam beat Sally by only a few seconds. And that can be seen as downplaying, downplaying his accomplishment. Now, but of course the context could matter. So for example, if it's a competition that's say 100 meters, then a few seconds is huge. That's, that is a big difference. But if it's over the course of say a marathon, beating someone by a couple seconds isn't much. It's like a couple, few steps or like some awkwardness at the water station. And so you have to look at the context in terms of, whether it's downplaying or not. Now, one final thing to watch for, as I noted, if someone is doing a cost-benefit analysis, and they're saying here are the pluses, here are the minuses, they need not be downplaying. What makes it downplaying is they're not laying out like reasons, like here are the negatives, here are the positives, but the positive outweighs the negative. They're just saying, yeah, this is bad, but here's some good, so feel good about it. Or, yeah, this seems good, but here's some bad, feel bad. It's kind of the illusion of giving reasons without the actual reasons. Again, going back to my food analogy, it's like the food is bad for you, but then someone puts like, something tasty on it. It doesn't make the food good, it just makes it taste good. Likewise, if something's really tasty and someone puts something unpleasant on it, well, it doesn't affect the nutrition, it just makes it not taste as good. So on the side of evil, these are very good techniques for making the good seem not so good, the bad seem not so bad, and dismissing. If you want to be really evil, again, it's often used in legal cases, just to kind of push away someone's, or political cases, to push away someone's credibility. Usually used in conjunction with racism, ageism, genderism, etc. It works pretty well with all that stuff. On the side of good, again, the defense is basically to say, but is this true? Is this a legitimate question of someone's credibility, or just an attack? Before moving away from downplayers, anything about downplaying, or Medicare, that needs more stuff? We now turn to rhetorical devices 2. Now, I've been mentioning stereotypes, a couple of them, and a stereotype is a very useful tool. Now, neutrally speaking, a stereotype is what? Well, it's a view we have of a group that is it something based on like careful reasoning and evidence? No, it's just kind of a sweeping generalization about a group of people, things, whatever. Now, stereotypes themselves are not inherently bad. We rely every day on stereotypes to like not die. For example, if you see a golden retriever roaming around off the leash, are you terrified of the golden retriever? No, because they tend to be not very murderous. But if you see like a tiger roaming off the leash, it could be a sweet tiger. It just wants to be your friend. But our stereotype of tigers is that they are a little bit murderous. And so we rely on our stereotype of things like tigers and lions and bears and oh my to survive. Individual animals may not be murdery at all. You could have like Ben, the friendly bear. He just wants to be your buddy. And you could have, in theory, you could have a murderous golden retriever. They actually do make perfect assassins because no one would suspect a golden retriever. Like if you were, police, the FBI went by someplace and people had been assassinated, you'd never think the golden retriever was responsible. They are. They're perfect assassins. So stereotypes are not inherently bad because we use them when we judge like, threats, danger, etc. We also use them to quickly judge other people. For example, suppose you go to, New York for spring break, and you're walking by an alley, and you see someone in the back of the alley whispering to their knife, like, yes, yes, Bertha, soon we shall cleanse the village. You'd probably stay away from that. But that's a stereotype. Maybe the person is maybe it's Matt Damon practicing for his Broadway play. He's working on his lines, and you could have met Matt Damon. He would have given you tickets to the next Red Sox game. But of course, when you see people talking to knives, stereotypically we think they are probably dangerous. And so we use that stereotype, to avoid death. So yeah, stereotypes are not inherently like a bad thing. They're basically shortcuts we use, and sometimes they keep us from dying. Then, what about the rhetorical device? Well, the rhetorical device is this. Stereotypes, definition is still the same. Stereotype, again, is a sweeping generalization about a group. And used rhetorically, we cash in on the negative or positive stereotypes, not to prove a point, because there's no logic here, but to make people feel positive, so they believe something, or feel negative, so they believe something. And we rely on these uncritical generalizations to make people feel a certain way. But again, logically, they prove nothing. So we just like say stereotype claim, that doesn't prove anything. But of course, people don't say stereotype claim, they put out the actual stereotype. Examples? Well, there's basically two polarities of stereotypes, the positive and the negative. Now, the positive stereotypes, they attribute to a people, group, etc., qualities we regard as, not surprisingly, positive, qualities we'd like to have. And the negative, of course, attributes to the group qualities that are seen as undesirable. Now, interestingly enough, even positive stereotypes are in a way bad, because they are unthinking, uncritical generalizations. And oddly enough, positive stereotypes can be as weaponized as negative stereotypes. So I'll show in a bit. So what are some common stereotypes? Well, we can roll through the usual ones. For example, we have stereotypes. I gave the example of like dogs. Golden retrievers are nice. Pit bulls are mean. And then of course when it comes to humans, we've got all kinds along ethnic, gender lines. So for example, stereotypes about women are what? Emotional, not emotional? Yeah, emotional. Men, emotional, not emotional? Not emotional. Missed that. Just don't have it. Just that's how it is. And of course, ethnicities. People who are Asian are supposedly, yeah, smart, which is a positive stereotype. If someone says, hey, you're really smart, I'd be like, thank you. Also good at math, which is also a useful skill. People who are Jewish are supposedly good with money. And they tend to be doctors and lawyers, which are positive qualities. Being good with money, being likely to be a lawyer or doctor, all seem like good things. Yeah, so we have positive stereotypes for ethnicities, and of course many negative ones. So how do people use these? How are these deployed? Well, negative ones, it's pretty easy to see how they would be used. For example, much of our political debate, if you can call it that, about the border rests on stereotypes. For example, people who are coming across the border are assumed to be, by people who don't want them coming across, are assumed to be what? Well, why does Trump want to build that wall? According to him, what's the problem? What are the people that care about him? What are they like?
Is it that they're taking jobs here?
Yeah, they're stealing our jobs. They just come to the door and say, I'm a professor now. That's how it works, I assume. Also, they're coming here, in addition to stealing jobs, they're also coming here to do what? Not to steal jobs, to steal cars and other stuff. Yeah, to do the crimes. So they're criminals and they're stealing jobs and committing other crimes. And also, when they're coming across the border, they're bringing with them, yeah, drugs, lots of drugs. Marijuana, cocaine, Red Bull, all that stuff. Also, of course, they're supposed to be bringing disease. Like in Fox News is going on a caravan, they're talking about how there's like disease in the caravan. Yeah, so the stereotype is they're criminals stealing our jobs, they're bringing drugs, and they've got disease. And those are all negative stereotypes, and there's no argument there. When they say, when they're appealing to that stereotype, they're essentially saying, here's a negative view of migrants, therefore, wall. But of course, it doesn't follow. Interestingly, those same stereotypes have been used. It's like there's like a racist handbook for immigration. They used to say this about the Irish, that they were going to come and steal American jobs, they were full of disease, that they were committing crimes. They said it about the Italians, the Germans, etc. And so there's like a handbook I guess everyone gets. It's like, you know, here you go, you're racist, here's your handbook. And they work because the stereotypes are pretty standard, and they appeal to people's fears. People are afraid of getting diseased. People are afraid of having their jobs stolen. People are afraid of crime. And so the debate about the border really isn't a debate, it's mostly just people throwing out scary stereotypes. Also, a lot of social policy is built around stereotypes. For example, Florida, a while back, had a policy of drug testing people who were getting, you know, welfare. And the reason why was what? Why test people for drugs who are getting welfare? Well, the assumption is that they are using, yeah, they're using drugs. That they're all, you know, lazy druggies, and we don't want to give our money to those people. What was kind of funny is one of the people from the Daily Show came to Florida and was, you know, with Rick Scott at a press conference, and he asked Rick Scott if he would pee in a cup so they could test him, because he gets state money. And so some people kind of sarcastically proposed that anyone, all contractors and all, you know, the governor, etc., would have to do the same thing because they are getting state money. But of course the assumption is that poor people use drugs and people who are wealthier don't. But is that true? Do poor people use a lot of drugs? No, because drugs are expensive. You know, if you're poor, you're not going to be buying a lot of cocaine. That's a pricey drug. Yeah, so the rate of drug use among people who are poor is no higher, probably less than the rate of people who aren't, because again, drugs are expensive. And so it's a stereotype that people who are poor use a lot of drugs. But it essentially was the basis for a policy, that stereotype. Also, of course, criminal sentencing is based on a lot of stereotypes. If you look at it, sentencing goes along ethnic lines, same crime, you know, same seriousness, different sentences. And the reason is typically just stereotypes. The assumption is certain people are just worse. Politics, again, full of this stuff. Both, you know, Democrats and Republicans do this. Hillary Clinton had her famous line about super predators, and Bill Clinton was behind the buildup of the prison industrial complex, cashing in on untrue stereotypes about people. And so this is really important because pretty much all the policies we have are built on untrue stereotypes. You go and you look and like, oh, you know, poor people are on drugs. You got to test them. It's like, not really. The immigrants are bringing disease. Not really, because their vaccination rates are the same or better than ours. You know, this ethnicity is really likely to commit crimes. Well, no, not really. And so most of our policies are just based on stereotypes. Now getting to positive stereotypes, I mentioned before that even though, like, if we're going to be stereotyped, I guess I'd want a positive stereotype, but even those can be weaponized. A good example is this. The reason some have argued that there are positive stereotypes of Asians was because that was weaponized. During the Cold War, the United States, of course, was up against the Soviet Union, and we wanted to be the good guys. And the Russians were able to go and point to American racism as, you know, they would show, you know, propaganda films with basically taken from American news of like the police setting dogs on civil rights protesters, etc. And so the US is like, wow, we got an image problem. And so what they decided to do was kind of undo the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was basically saying, you know, super racist immigration laws saying you can't come here if you're Chinese, and decided to change that. And they were presenting the Asians as model immigrants. The idea being that, you know, they would say they're very smart, very positive, and they based immigration on, just like, you know, President Trump is saying today, we want the best people. So they would get, you know, highly educated, highly successful Asians to come here and say, you know, look, there's no problem in America, everyone can be successful, and would use that to justify, you know, cutting social programs. So even the positive stereotypes about people can be weaponized against other people, or weaponized against them. So for example, the stereotype about Jewish people, that they're successful and are good with money, that gets weaponized into something that they're, well, what you hear from the right, about how they're trying to replace people and how they're conniving and sneaky. So even the positive stereotype of being good with money becomes weaponized by white nationalists. So stereotypes are super useful, generally for, well, for evil. So, on the side of evil, how do you use them? Well, you gotta know your audience. So, if your audience is, say, sexist, racist, then you would use those sexist and racist stereotypes. For example, one of the ongoing debates about U.S. military policy is, should women be allowed to serve in combat situations? Now, of course, in many cases, that's not set by policy because the enemy doesn't say, well, oh, that's right, we can't be shooting these people because they're not combat troops, so combat just goes where it does. But of course, people want to get into combat services because better faster promotion, better pay. Now, what happens a lot of the time is, instead of debating the merits of women in combat branches, they'll just go on the stereotypes, just saying, well, women will cry, or they'll be weak, or they don't want to chip a nail, or how can you fight when you're wearing high heels? Which are no arguments, they're just stereotypes. But if a person knows their audience is sexist, those stereotypes will work. Likewise, if someone wants to talk about immigration and building a wall, they would use racist stereotypes, appealing to their audience's acceptance of those stereotypes. So kind of key point of using stereotypes is know your audience, know their biases and prejudices, and on the side of evil, play them. I mean, a good example of this is President Trump. He's really good at this. He seems to really grasp people's biases and prejudices, the white nationalists, people who hate, who don't want immigration, and he's really able to tap into that. He's good with stereotypes. Very useful. Democrats, of course, can also do the same thing, but usually they don't tend to do that particular tactic. They tend to spin more positive stereotypes. So the side of evil, know your audience, know their biases, and then use the stereotypes that are appropriate. Don't want to argue why we should have border security, appeal to racist stereotypes. Don't want women stepping on traditional roles, appeal to sexist stereotypes. Want to keep harsh policing communities, appeal to racist stereotypes. And it's very, very effective. As I mentioned, most of our policies are built on empty stereotypes. Oh, also racism, sexism, of course. So on the side of good, what do you do? Well, kind of the standard question on the side of good is to ask, but is this true? So for example, if someone lays out stereotypes about migrants being criminals who steal our jobs and have diseases, the thing to do is look at the actual facts. Now, as far as stealing our jobs, the evidence is that generally migrants are beneficial, but of course there can be some individual losses. People do lose some jobs. In terms of crime rates are, having more people means more crime, but migrants commit crimes, at least the evidence shows, at a rate lower than, Americans that are already here. So not a huge threat there. What about the disease? Well, the Cato Institution, which is a conservative think tank, shows that, Central America has vaccination rates comparable to ours. So they're no more likely to be diseased than us. For example, the measles outbreak that occurred wasn't migrants bringing us measles, it was our anti-vaxxers bringing us measles. American bred measles built in America for Americans. And so the defense against stereotypes is to try to find the truth. Because if we're going to have sensible policies and make good decisions, we should base them on, reality rather than just stereotypes. So those are our stereotypes. Before pressing on to innuendo, anything about stereotypes that needs more stereo or type? Innuendo. Innuendo is really useful. In general, well, first, what is it? Innuendo is to imply or suggest something negative without actually directly saying it. Now, it's a kind of a subtle thing. Now, sometimes people just directly say terrible things, and that can be useful as well. So, for example, well, I'll use President Trump because he's pretty good at this. He doesn't use he does use some innuendo, but usually he just directly says, terrible things about people. But what if you want to be like more subtle? Well, that's where innuendo comes in. So its function is this. Its function is when you want to say something negative or terrible, but you don't want to say it directly. A good question would be, well, why might I want to do that? Well, one good reason is that it provides, in a way, plausible deniability. Because you can say something, suggest something terrible without saying something terrible, so if people call you on it, and it's going badly, like on social media, you can say, I really didn't mean that. And if you just suggested it without directly stating it, a person can say, well, I didn't mean for it to be taken this way, and they have some legitimate escape. Namely that they didn't say something terrible, they just implied it, and they can say, I really didn't mean that terrible thing, sorry, I'm sorry I was misinterpreting. So that's kind of reason one. You can say the terrible with an escape route, which is very useful. So if you're in politics, just want to be terrible, you can kind of try it out. And if people really like that terrible thing, you can own the terrible thing because people like it. Or if it goes, you're like, oh, this is going bad, you can say, that's not what I meant, which is a common tactic in politics. You've probably all heard politicians and celebrities, they'll say something seemingly kind of terrible, they get called on it, and they'll say, well, that's not what I really meant. They'll try to walk it back. Now, if someone directly says something terrible, then it's harder to walk back. But if someone says something that suggests something terrible, it's easier to say, I was misinterpreted. I didn't mean that terrible thing. What kind of person do you think I am? Now, a second reason is a legal one. Now, in the U.S., we have very weak libel and slander laws. The president has spoken on several occasions of wanting to make them strict, so people can sue the press and people that slander and say mean things. Some countries like Britain have very strict laws. And if you say something negative, they can take you to court. Now, proving that what you said is true is the decisive defense, but other countries have much stricter rules about that kind of thing. We have pretty loose rules, which is probably good. Or maybe biased though, as American. So if you want to say something bad about someone without getting sued, then innuendo can be quite useful. Now in the US, of course, again, slander and defamation laws are really, really weak because of the First Amendment. But if you don't want to take a chance, it can be easier to avoid the risk of being sued by implying rather than directly stating. And if you are operating in the UK, then you definitely want to get good at innuendo, because if you say something negative, someone might decide to just sue you. I remember I've written for British publications before, and they're like, you can't say that because they might sue you. I'm like, okay. I wonder why we have the revolution, because the right to say mean stuff. Now, a third reason is basically a matter of art. Anybody can say just mean stuff to someone. That's super simple. But to imply things, the negative things, requires more skill. So if someone wants to have a certain artistry in their insulting, that can be useful. Fourthly is comedy. It used to be considered a fine comedic art to engage in innuendo, to not directly say something negative, but say something implied negative that is or was hilarious. W.C. Fields, who was a famous comic, who's super dead now, but he was really good at innuendo. But now he's super dead, so he's not good at it. Unless he's in heaven, then maybe he's using innuendo in heaven and just celestial crowds. So there's various reasons to use it. Now, in terms of on the side of evil, again, the main technique is to say something terrible, being able to avoid the consequences. That's sort of the main function. So, again, if you're wanting to say something awful, but but want to be able to like gauge the reaction for committing to it, super useful. Now, sometimes this is done with, you might have heard the phrases like dog whistling and signaling, where someone will say something that is a dog whistle term, but then that way they can kind of walk it back. Because they can say, I didn't mean that. For example, give an example of innuendo. And in many cases, a person can present a plausible defense because maybe they really didn't mean it. And we can use the example from our own battle for governor. We, of course, had Andrew Gillum going up against DeSantis. Yeah, DeSantis, right? He's our governor now? I don't know. Okay. I just look at who signs my paycheck. And, of course, DeSantis made the classic line of saying, basically, don't vote for Gillum because he didn't want Gillum doing what?
Monkeying it up.
Yeah, monkeying it up. And, of course, people said that's super racist. And Gillum just said, well, I'm not Gillum, DeSantis said what?
I don't remember.
Yeah, his reply was essentially, he wasn't being anything racist, he was just meaning don't mess with that stuff. So he was able to, because he didn't directly say, something racist. Clearly, openly racist. He didn't say, just throw in some racist, direct racist term. Because he could plausibly say, oh, I didn't mean this racist thing, despite the history of this term being super racist. Just an accident. So when it able, looking at it, I guess with sort of a negative interpretation, what it could have been is he did mean it as racist, and he was signaling his base, basically saying, hey, racist voters, I'm racist like you. But then he's saying to everyone else, if someone calls him on it, he can say, I'm not being racist. I mean, the phrase, monkeying things up is not racist at all. People compared George Bush to a monkey, and he's a white guy. It can't be racist at all. So provide someone with plausible deniability. And maybe DeSantis was completely innocent about it. He just used a phrase, and maybe as soon as it came to his mouth, he was like, oh, I can't believe I said that. I'm going to be in so much trouble. Or maybe he was thinking, time to signal my racist voters that I'm one of them, but I don't want to do it openly because I want to get other people's votes. Maybe it was innuendo. So all the dog whistles and signal words for racism are typically a form of innuendo, because someone can say something that their followers will know that's racist, and other people who look at it and say, hey, that's racist, they can say, well, no, I just used that word accidentally. I don't mean it in a racist way. So it's super useful for sending, political signals. It's basically most commonly saying, hey, my racist, voters, I'm racist like you. But then being able to say to everyone else, I'm not racist at all. So how do you defend against it? Well, the main defense, of course, is recognizing and trying to see what it really is. And as we can see with the DeSantis case and other similar cases, there's considerable debate and battles about, was it really innuendo or not? Because in that case, the monkeying it up case, if he was using innuendo, then that's, pretty racist. But he can say, no, I wasn't, it was just a normal phrase and I didn't intend it this way. And we can't always tell what's in someone's heart. So kind of the defense would be trying to sort out what is it they really mean. This, of course, would involve, since we can't read people's minds, we have to look at their background. If someone says it and they have no history of ever doing racist stuff, you'd say, yeah, they're just using the term. It was just unfortunate they picked that phrase, just accident. But if they do have a history of say racist stuff, you might be more inclined to say, hey, they are using innuendo here. Now, there are, of course, other forms of innuendo. It's not just for political signaling. One thing that people often do when they have to write letters of recommendation is a form of innuendo known as condemning or damning with faint praise. And the idea is this. A person can say something seemingly positive, but they say it in such a lukewarm, weak way, that it actually implies something negative. To be more specific about it, to condemn with faint praise is to praise someone, but far less than they really would be due if you were serious. And so kind of the idea is that the weak praise, instead of just coming off as like weak praise, it actually seems to imply something negative. So it has the effect of, like praising the person at this level, but it actually implies you're not praising them at all, you're kind of in a hidden way saying something pretty negative about them. And again, this often appears, as you might imagine, things like recommendation letters, etc. Now this is one reason why I always recommend when you get a recommendation letters, always get someone who's going to say nice things. Because you don't want your recommendation letter to include this. Because, while not as bad as, say, like directly saying terrible things like, for God's sakes, never hire this person, they're terrible, it's pretty bad. What would be an example? Well, if a letter says, suppose like you're somebody on a hiring committee or hiring for a company, and you get a letter that says, this person, Jane Smith has worked with this company for five years. She's done an adequate job, I guess. She generally showed up to work and completed most of her duties reasonably competently most of the time. Would you rush to hire that person? No, because the person really hasn't said anything terribly negative about them, but saying things like, they did their work adequately most of the time, kind of implies that there were times when they didn't. And so there is some praise, like this person did a good job, I guess. The I guess implies something negative. So the idea is, with innuendo, saying something negative without directly saying it. So, quick recap. Innuendo definition, it's when you imply or entail something negative without directly saying it. Reasons to use it, again, would be, one, you don't want to own the negativity, but you want to say the negative. And a good example would be like, dog whistling and signaling. Also, again, cases of like legal liability. Also, it can be more sort of artistic. And finally, in a way, kind of like a good use potentially for it would be just common, just humor. People using innuendo to say something funny. The defense is basically looking to see what is a person seeing through the innuendo to see the actual negativity. Before finishing up with the loaded question, anything about innuendo that needs more in or innuendo? Loaded questions. Now, loaded questions different from a leading question. If you ever seen like the lawyer shows or crime dramas, the lawyer will often say, objection, leading the witness. Now, a leading question essentially is one where it's exactly what it sounds like. What the concern is that if the lawyer, to lead the witnesses, to direct them to say, in a particular path, in other words, trying to direct their testimony. And so, the other lawyer will object, and they're trying to guide the testimony. So a leading question is literally directing, and that's not a loaded question. A loaded question is still a question, but the strict definition is this. It's a question based on one or more unwarranted assumptions. So asking the question already assumes something, typically something negative. How are these used? Well, basically the following ways. One use is humor. There are classic, loaded questions that were, or maybe still are, considered comedic. Some of them today are considered horrifying as opposed to comedic, but at one time, comedic. For example, this used to be considered pretty funny, this question. To ask someone, have you stopped beating your wife? Now, it's a loaded question because it's based on the assumption of what? The person is beating their wife. And the reason why it's a loaded question is because it would seem that there's no safe answer. Because if you say yes, that means what? You were beating your wife, but now you've stopped. But if you say no, that means that you are still beating your wife. So seemingly no safe answer. It's, the question is a trap. Now the correct answer, if someone has not been beating their wife, is no, because you can't stop what you haven't started. But of course, people aren't going to typically think, yes, the person has said no, therefore they mean they have not started doing this. It sounds like a bad answer. So this technique is commonly used as comedy. And again, what was funny in the past, really wasn't funny in the past, but it's seen as not being funny now. But there are, actual comedic uses of this. I will not attempt those because not very comedic. Another use, of course, as that question also sort of implies, is something that's designed not to get information, but to convey information, or, it's kind of a third use, to trap somebody. So, for example, a person might present a loaded question saying, might ask President Trump, President Trump, how can you work with these radical socialist Democrats who want to destroy America? Now that, of course, is a loaded question because it assumes that the Democrats are radical socialists and want to destroy America. So the person is probably not asking for information, they're making a statement. Essentially they're saying, yes, President Trump, I agree with you, the Democrats are terrible people, and they're trying to make a statement rather than ask a question. Also, finally, and we'll close with this, it's often used as a trap. It can be done sometimes by parents or police to load into the question the assumption of guilt. So if a parent says to their kid, so what were you doing when you broke that vase? And of course the assumption is the kid broke the vase. So if they say something, they've convicted themselves. Also, police interrogations, especially when people start getting tired and exhausted and scared and hungry, they'll sometimes bring out loaded questions because when someone's tired, exhausted, and hungry, their ability to sort of sort through questions becomes not so good. And so a loaded question that might have not caught them earlier can catch them. So one way that people often get, one tool for getting people to confess falsely is loaded questions, especially when the person being interrogated is exhausted, tired, and scared. So next time we'll look at more loaded questions. So have a good rest of the day, and I'll see you on the Thursday.